Welcome to Faith Cafe, an adult discipleship program of Christ Presbyterian Church in beautiful downtown Madison, Wisconsin. This week's focus is practical next steps for Christians looking to engage in the issue of immigration. Our presenter is the managing attorney of the Community Immigration Law Center, Aisa Oliveiras.
Lord God, may you find in us yielded people, open people. May you speak into our hearts and minds and spur us into action that would be fitting of us being your people in this time and space. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rich. You're always too kind. CPC truly is a community for me. And yes, usually pre-COVID times on Fridays, my little one would come early from school and run around and run all around CPC. Oops, and that was one of her toys that I just stepped on. And she, I don't know when that thing's gonna stop. There we go. And she asks me, even now, she asks me over and over to go to visit CPC. And I'm like, oh, nobody's there, Mom. We can't go by. But she really misses being in community there, for sure. So thank you all for coming back this week. Last week, we spoke just after inauguration, which was a time when things seemed kind of at that time in immigration policy, we felt hopeful, but we just, there was a lot of unknown. Almost immediately after we got off of the call last week, there were announcements on executive orders that were being signed and different policy memos that were being issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice. So a lot has happened in 1 week, and I will update you both on policy that we're hoping will be overturned by the Biden administration, some proposed policy and developments. I'll talk to you about a couple of stories of clients that we have that we had last year, a couple wins, and then we're going to do a group activity called Tough Decisions, where essentially you all will go into groups and I'll give you the powers of the U.S. government to decide who to allow into our country and who to leave out. So that'll be what we do today. So I'm going to get started. Let me share my screen. Here we go, part 2. Oh, I already started at the end, so I'll go all the way to the beginning. Here we go. So this is what I just went over. So what we've seen in the past 4 years is definitely a dismantling of our immigration system. We prevented entry of many asylum seekers through what we call the Remain in Mexico policy. There's 65,000 people currently stuck along the border in Mexico waiting to seek asylum in the United States, waiting to have their hearings in the United States. Before the Remain in Mexico policy, people were allowed either into the United States to seek asylum and were held in detention facilities, or they were allowed and released to family members who could show and prove that they would take care of these individuals or allow these individuals into their home and provide them with care. And so currently there are people stuck in this process. Court has been canceled for people who are subject to the Remain in Mexico policy since March. So there's been no development for these 65,000 people waiting to get an answer to their claim who want protection from the United States. We're also denying status to people who are applying for work permits. There was a policy that started to make it more difficult about who qualified for work and how they could qualify for work. And it also became more expensive to qualify for work. And so it's a way that it started to limit individuals' access to be able to provide for their families while they wait for a decision on their asylum claim. And that's those people who are here in the United States before the Remain in Mexico policy went into place. We also saw a termination of DACA back in 2017. That was vacated, but when it was vacated in June, the office that processes these applications was refusing to accept them and was in fact actually rejecting them. And so it's only until now that we're starting to see them be accepted after a court, a judge a judge basically ordered the government to begin accepting them under this new policy after the Supreme Court vacated that decision. So we're seeing DACA, it's back, and it's back in its 2012 form, which has been exciting. But we're also seeing a rise in arrests right in the past. And I'll talk about how the Biden administration has changed that. 2 weeks ago, well, this was when I wrote this first, it was at the beginning of January, but they did announce an enforcement priority for sanctuary cities. So they basically said in December, or late, well, it was late September, and then again in December, that they would be targeting sanctuary cities, basically places with sanctuary policies. You could lump Madison in there, and saying that they would make sure that they would increase enforcement in those areas. And the Trump administration also expedited removal, which basically announced that people who are arrested within the first 100 miles of the border have no right to a judge, no right to a hearing, no right to have an attorney, and would be removed immediately. So I read a statistic just the other day that was really surprising to me. It said that in the Trump administration, there was 1,000 changes to immigration policy. So almost every day of that administration, there was some type of change. And it was definitely a roller coaster to practice immigration law under that administration. It became increasingly difficult, and clients were, their anxiety grew every single day. But some changes that we're already seeing and some proposed changes by this administration include a 100-day moratorium on deportations. That started last Friday. And we saw a release of individuals from the detention facilities in droves in some parts of the nation over the weekend and on Monday. Unfortunately, yesterday, a Texas district court implemented a temporary restraining order for the government to be able to continue with this moratorium. And so it's currently on hold. It's on a stay until the government is able to respond in 2 weeks. But something that did change was a memo about enforcement priorities. And last week we talked about how, under Obama and under the Trump administration, there was two very different ways to look at enforcement of our immigration laws. The Obama administration focused a lot on public safety and national security through secure communities and people with criminal infractions. And then we came over to the Trump administration that prioritized everybody that was undocumented. So it was just a lot larger blanket. But last week, in a memo that was published, the Department of Homeland Security is being instructed only to work on arresting those individuals who are a public safety or a threat to our national security. And so definitely narrowing again those people that we are going to detain and deport. The Biden administration also reinstated DACA, and one of the promises is that they will end the Remain in Mexico policy and that they will reinstate or put in place a policy that will allow people to seek asylum here in the United States again. The Biden administration has also promised to introduce a bill with a path to citizenship, and this is huge. A lot of people, and we talked about this last week, don't know that that's the only protection against deportation, and that a lot of ways that people think that it's easy to get a green card is because, you're married or because you have U.S. citizen children. You can get a green card or you can get citizenship, and it's really not that easy. For example, I have a client whose sister applied for her 20 years ago, and they're still waiting for a visa to be available, right? So there's just a lot of different levels of ways that you can become a green card holder or a citizen, and they're not really easy. It's not just like filling out an application. And one thing that made it even harder was this public charge, or this wealth test, where we started to ask people for their credit score, for how much they're making, for how much their sponsors or the people who live in their household or their or a family members might make, so that the government can ensure that they won't rely on public any kind of public funding. And so it's a form, and it's a application that's definitely making it harder for people to get on that path to become green card holders and eventually citizens. So before I move on to kind of stories from our clients, are there any questions about policies that were implemented in the Trump administration that might be changed under the Biden administration, or anything you all have heard in the news since inauguration day, since I last saw everybody?
So I kind of missed what of those things have actually been implemented and what are just plans.
So the 100-day moratorium was implemented, and it's now on a temporary restraining order. So it's now been blocked by a district court in Texas. And the enforcement priority. So there was a memo released by the head of the Department of Homeland Security instructing Immigration and Customs Enforcement on how to make their arrests from here on out, until there's a permanent change that they're going to look at implementing, I believe, after the 100 days is up. They're supposed to have a more concrete memo that is issued about what the enforcement priorities of the government are going to be moving forward in this administration. But for now, it's those people who pose a public safety and national security risk. And in DACA is back on the table, like the Supreme Court had ruled back in June. So those are the three things that we are looking at that are now in place. Ending the Remain in Mexico and introducing the bill, that it has a path to citizenship, and ending the public charge test. Those are all things that have been promised or talked about that I believe we're supposed to hear about as soon as this Friday.
I hear that they also stopped construction of the wall.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what's the basis of the TRO?
The basis is, well, the standing that Texas had was they claimed that they would suffer financially for having to support immigrants possibly from other states that might move to Texas because of the 100-day moratorium.
And has there been anything said or done regarding the children who've been separated from their parents?
I know that the Biden administration talked about possibly announcing this Friday a more broad effort to ensure that all children will be reunited with their parents. Part of that is also ending this Remain in Mexico policy, which really a lot of desperate parents began sending their children over here, by themselves. And so we're also hoping that there'll be more compassionate policy around unaccompanied minors and children, as they seek asylum here in the United States. But we're hoping to hear a more concrete announcement soon about the reunification of children with their families, but there hasn't been anything to my knowledge that has been concrete at this point, but it's been talked about definitely by this administration.
I think in the news today there was this news about Jill Biden will be leading the effort to reunite the kids with their family. That's one of agenda items that she will be taking on sometime soon.
Wow. Yeah, that would be
And I
wonderful.
think also on the TOC, I think one of the things that Texas brought up was that they were part of a contract with the government, in that deportation, and that they would be suffering from
Right.
that.
Yep, they did create a contract with the Trump administration in December around detention and deportation, that they're hoping that the government the Department of Homeland Security would uphold.
Aisa, how should we think about the mood of the ICE organization and leadership that manage all this chaos? The fact that they released people rapidly last weekend, is that a indication that they're ready to move beyond this and they don't like it? Or how should we think of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. When they announced the moratorium, I was skeptical because our ICE offices, are so locally controlled, right? We have an ICE office in Milwaukee, we have one in Chicago, and their leadership really comes from those head deportation officers in their unit. So I wondered how each of them would respond. It looked different nationally. It looked different here, for Dodge County. I know that we had one thing that me and my colleague Erin Barbado, who will be doing a webinar, and I'll give you all the information on that, on policy change, I think in mid-February. So there'll be even more to announce at that point. She and I were really surprised that ICE was doing this on their own. So before I could even email them the next morning about, clients that should be released, under this new enforcement priority, under this moratorium, they were releasing them. Right. So we were just so surprised that it was happening, on their own volition. Other places made it more difficult. And, those clients that we really, really want out, might have been denied their release. But we are seeing a definite shift, and it has just created a lot of hope around the work that we do at that facility, because it is a facility where, there's a lot of pain and definitely a lot of loss of hope when you're stuck inside 23 hours a day. So it's definitely nice to see people reunited with their families when they thought that they were at their end of their stay. So we're seeing new hope in cases that we thought were hopeless. So it's been good to see, and we're wondering now what this temporary restraining order means from Texas, and how ICE is going to respond to that, whether they're going to respond to that as quickly as they did when the moratorium was announced, or whether they're going to continue to release people.
So how has COVID-19 impacted all of these immigration issues?
So I would say the hardest and the biggest issue has been that ICE continued to detain and deport people during COVID-19, and it contributed to the spread of COVID-19 in Central America and in Mexico. And it also contributed to the spread within facilities like county facilities like Dodge. The Dodge facility, remember, is also a county jail, with people who are serving jail sentences who are from Dodge County. And so when individuals are being detained on a daily, weekly basis and being brought into that facility, without us knowing whether or not they might have been exposed to COVID or had COVID, they began to spread it inside of the facility. And we do have individuals who are high risk. We have a man with tuberculosis who is at high risk of having complications of COVID-19. We have people who have heart issues, who have diabetes. And so we're very afraid, even now, for their lives as they continue to be detained in such close quarters, because it's impossible to, keep social distance when you're sharing common areas, you're sharing showers, you're sharing a cafeteria, and it's definitely a place where people don't feel safe. And guards are not always wearing their masks, and they're not always wearing their gloves. So I think that's been the biggest, difficulty with COVID-19 is people who are detained. But it also really altered the way we did our work because we had to go fully remote. Where I haven't been back to Chicago. I think I told you guys last week since February 23rd, and I was there once or twice a week before. And so it doesn't mean we're not still representing people. We're just doing everything over the phone now. So that's been also something to really get used to.
Status of the most recent caravan? Aren't there?
There have been reports of a caravan coming from Honduras. It's going to be interesting to see once they get to the U.S.-Mexico border, how many people decide to seek asylum in the United States ultimately, and how they will be processed. Are they going to be subject to the Remain in Mexico policy? Or Title 45, which is currently in place because we are in a pandemic. So Title 45 is apart from the Remain in Mexico policy, and they're invoking that to say people cannot seek asylum right now because we are in a pandemic. And so they might be turning people away ultimately to stay in Mexico and wait until Title 45 is lifted. So it's become a really precarious situation for asylum seekers to seek asylum here in the United States. It's been almost impossible since the Remain in Mexico policy and since the pandemic started.
I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but I remember seeing in the office when Leah was in there and like copying 300 pages about each country and why asylum was necessary. So
Right.
Are many of these people looking for economic gain, or are there really threats to their being, or
Sure. So when you seek asylum, you have to seek asylum on one of 5 bases. You have to show that that you fear persecution or that you would suffer persecution in your home country based on your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or because you're a member of a particular social group, which can be pretty broad. And that's where us lawyers take our creative will in creating particular social groups because they're not well defined in the law. But other than that, race, religion, nationality, political opinion, those are all pretty well defined. And so if you cannot prove that you fear persecution on one of those 5 bases, or that you would be persecuted in the future on one of those 5 bases, you don't win asylum. So when we gather 300 pages of country conditions, we're trying to prove that persecution would occur or has occurred in the past based on one of those 5 protected grounds. And country conditions is really important to be able to corroborate the stories of our clients who have suffered persecution in their home country. And it's also really important to show in the future how their governments might react or might fail to protect them if they are deported to their home country. And so those reports really are pieces of evidence that are important to proving these claims up. We also often get experts who work for us on a pro bono basis, people who might be experts in Mexico, in Central America. I've had experts from Venezuela, from Nicaragua. I currently am working with a couple from Palestine, and we have an expert, that we're working with or trying to find there, somebody who's an expert on the West Bank who can prove and talk to an immigration judge about, the issues in the West Bank. The immigration judges, sometimes they know about some of the issues going on in the world, but sometimes they don't. And it's up to us to tell a story of what would happen to our client, what happened to our client in the past, and what would happen to our client if they were to return in the future. And so we rely heavily on country conditions experts, on reports, on our storytelling and our client's testimony to be able to inform the immigration judge on these issues. So at 300-page filings on the lower side, sometimes we're up to about 1,000, 1,500-page filings. So since we're speaking about clients, and this, having to prove up these things in immigration court, I'd like to share a couple of stories with you before we go into our activity. Let me see if there we go. So I won't read everything. You can start reading while I kind of talk about this particular client, but this particular client was arrested during the raids that we had in September of 2018. And he, actually was leaving for work when he was asked by somebody in an unmarked vehicle who he was. And was asked to approach the vehicle. And when he said, "I'm not that person that you're looking for," was asked for his name and was asked for his status. And from there proceeded to be arrested. Just leaving his home in the apartment complex parking lot. So we represented him. He was given a $20,000 bond. The family, that was no way. They're living on one income. So there was no way they were going to be able to post the $20,000 bond. One thing about immigration bonds that's really important that I didn't know until I started practicing immigration law is that you don't pay, 10% down, you pay the full amount, right? The full $20,000 has to be paid to the Department of Homeland Security. And so in this case, it was really difficult, but we went before an immigration judge and we were able to get that significantly lowered so that the family could put together fundraisers. They had food sales, anything that they could do to try and get the money together to reunite this client with their family. I just happened to see this client today. We were renewing his work permit and I asked him, at a distance, of course, how he's doing. And he's like, this, just having a work permit completely changed my life. I have insurance for all of my family. I am able to work at a higher wage. I have a social security number and I have a secure job. And so it's been just having a work permit has been a huge change for this family. We worked very closely with the Dane County Office of Immigrant Affairs and Fabiola Hampton, the social worker, to make sure that the family was able to pay rent while he was detained. He was detained, I would say, about close to 5.5 weeks. And so that was significant time of separation for them with the family. So we still don't know whether or not this client is going to ultimately be able to be allowed to stay here in the United States, but at least we know for now the family is reunited and they're stable. And we will have a hearing late next year to decide his ultimate fate. So another thing our work does is protect against erroneous deportation. Those of you who joined me last week, we talked about this individual who was a green card holder, who fought his case from while he was in detention and actually missed the birth of his first daughter. Wasn't his first child, but it was his first daughter who was born. And we were able to challenge the government under the law that they were trying to deport him under. We were like, nope, that's not right. You don't have the law right. And after, a lengthy appeal process, we won. And so it's so important that you have a lawyer in these cases because sometimes the government gets it wrong and we're able to prove that in court. And finally, we also represent individuals who are vulnerable, especially vulnerable in these proceedings. In this case, this client has some serious mental health issues, was experiencing schizophrenia in the facility and was diagnosed before he was detained and was a victim of a crime before he was detained. And so he is now released and is living safely with a family member. And we've been able to get him access to mental health treatment. He now is able to speak confidently about his mental illness and is receiving the services that he needs so that we can continue to fight his case in immigration court. The only one of these three right now that is safely here is our green card holder. The other two, we still don't know what their fate will be, but they are living safely with family and are receiving services through the Immigrant Affairs Office locally. So we'll start with our group activity.
Isa,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I know that you guys work so hard, and when you are able to secure some, like free someone from custody or win asylum,
Mhm.
it means a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about one of the cases that you won that you guys won about 2 weeks ago? The
Oh,
asylum.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So 2 weeks ago, one of our lawyers won an asylum case for a mother and her two children. But the way that we came into contact with this family is that this woman actually came to a Silk Friday at CPC when we had our Silk Fridays, open to the public. She walked in and she said, my husband was detained yesterday and I don't know what to do. And I don't know what to do either, because I'm also, seeking asylum and we're all afraid to go back. And so we represented the husband and in proceedings, in immigration proceedings while he was detained. They wouldn't release him. He was there for almost 9 months. They wouldn't release him and we won his case. He was released and we took on the case of his wife and children and we won them asylum 2 weeks ago. Everything was done over the phone by our attorney, Vanessa Avila. And she, really prepped her clients really well because giving testimony over the phone is really difficult. Giving testimony in general is really difficult, but giving testimony over the phone is even harder to really bring out that emotion and ensure that an immigration judge understands the story, understands the emotion, understands the fear without seeing somebody can be really hard. But she did it, and we're really very proud. And this family will, they'll have green cards next year, and they have stability, and they live, and go to school in Wanakee. And so we're very, very proud to have that win under our belts. That was our first win of the new year.
Oh, wow.
And so is there any questions about any of the client stories before we do the quick kind of breakout rooms with this kind of exercise called tough decisions? Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I have a quick question about, is there any sort of accountability, I don't know if that's the right word, for personnel like ICE or whomever for like wrongful detention or anything like that? Like once someone has gone through weeks of detention or months of detention and something was not done correctly, is there any kind of accountability for them?
So the only accountability comes up at 180 days when we're able to file habeas corpus petitions in federal court. But that's only after 6 months, and that's if our clients last that long before signing their deportation because they don't want to be detained anymore. And that's really only if they have some sort of, if they haven't been able to get documents from their country to deport them. But when you're undocumented, there's very few things, very little recourse that you have against the government to hold you. And we've seen people wait in detention months and years waiting for a final decision on their case without being released. So there's not a ton of oversight. There are definitely a lot of abuses. And it's hard when you don't have a lawyer and you can't really there's a lot of facility. We're in the Dodge County facility and we meet with people on a regular basis. We know who's in there, we know how long they've been there. We can't help everybody, but we give information to everybody. But there's other facilities that kind of go unchecked where there's no lawyers and they're in a rural area and no one knows where they are, what's going on. So hopefully we see better oversight and we see people being released so that they can, even if they're going to face deportation, they don't face it behind, the doors of a detention facility.
You've told us stories and given us some stats of cases that you've been able to win and where significant things have happened. But I just want to say your impact is so much broader even than just those cases that you actually engage with. I know because my son was a owner manager with some other folks of some southwestern restaurants, and their cook, who was from Mexico, was swept up in one of these ICE raids, and the owners of the restaurant really went behind him, but they didn't know what they were doing. And from just advice from you and Jean-René, they were pointed towards an immigration lawyer. They were able to get him representation. They got the bail reduced. They got him released. He's with his family, and the restaurant and the community advocated for him, that he was a key part of the restaurant because he was the lead chef and all of this. And so he's back working, and it wasn't a case that you were really active in, and yet your advice and pointing people the right direction, where someone actually had support within the community, people who are willing to help pay for to post bond and pay for his lawyer, yet wouldn't have known what to do without you guys. So I'm just grateful for the times that you give little pieces of input and they have huge consequences. So I want to say,
yeah, and a lot of that credit goes to Jean-René for starting the clinic at CPC and building the trust of the community and building us as a nonprofit, a reputable nonprofit to people look to for good information, right? I was just on Facebook a minute ago with AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and someone from the UW Law School was like, I need an immigration lawyer in Madison. I was like, well, luckily, you know, that's my job, is basically to know them all and know what they do. So we take pride in being able to refer people to reputable attorneys and give them good advice and make sure that people are able to navigate this really sometimes, very often unjust system. Guidance is definitely so very important. So thank you, Jean-René, for the foresight and for building us up as a reputable source for information.
And I think credit goes to all these people here, the church, Presbyterian Church, is that vision.
Yes.
Created the Community Immigration Law Center and all the impact that it's having in the community. It's because CPC wanted something like that to happen and is fully behind it. And, this is one of the proof that, in one of our adult education, still comes twice. It just tells us how much we value this. But again, it's CPC who was behind. I was just an instrument that God used to open that door. And we just blessed that the door was wide open.
Thank you, Jean-René. You are so right. CPC, thank you to you all for your support. So I will jump in quickly. I'll to just do a quick exercise where basically I will give you all the power to be the government. And so, the local governments are who decide who can move to a country, and they consider some things legitimate factors for people to come to the US because there's limited resources in each country. And so they have priorities of who they allow into the country and who they do not. And so I'm going to have you imagine that you are the United States Congress, and I'm giving you the power to decide immigration policy. And so in your group, you will have to decide how to prioritize 15 different applicants. So I'm going to go over who those 15 people are. You can only choose 7 of them to be on a path to citizenship. Okay, so half of them you will have to choose to place on a path to citizenship, and the rest of them will be returned to their home countries. And your group has to decide together. It doesn't, by majority, maybe unanimous. When I do this with my high schoolers, it's really hard for them to get a unanimous decision about 7 people, about who the 7 will be. And so if you'll have one person in your group write down who the 7 will be, we'll go over who each group chose. I think the document is in the chat. Let me know if you are able to access it.
And these groups are going to have to work super quickly.
Yes. So you're going to have, I think we can do it in 15. Well, let's give it 8 minutes, Rich. Is that okay? Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
It's okay. So Barry, if you want to send everyone out to their breakout group, I was going to go over each individual, like read to you each individual person that's in the 15, but you have the breakout materials. And I feel like if I go over them, we're just going to spend time going over them. So go over them in your group. There's 15 people, and in your group, choose 7 of those individuals. And then we'll come back and report back on who each person chose, or what each group chose.
So I'll send you into groups, and then I will also send this link in case any of you haven't gotten the document. You need at least one person in your group to just kind of read through the 15 and then make your deliberations. It's important work you're doing tonight.
Sorry, Angie, I jumped out early. I was like looking at something and then it just booted me. I can share though.
I'm muted. Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Mary, we totally got like the 2 aces. We got Aisa and we got Jean Rene too. So
I know.
lucked out.
So, oh yeah, we're back in the main room now, I guess.
Now everyone's, yeah.
So it's A through O.
That was not fun.
No.
No.
That was really hard. We had a really hard time too. And I told Jean Rene a story about, one of my mentors, Stacy Toiber, who was my professor at UW Law School. At the end of it, she would just say, I just picked everybody. So she would never do the hard work of actually having to break it down. But I'm interested to hear from each group. I'll start with ours. There's the way that when we set up this activity, it's really grouped around, certain groups of people. A, B, E, and F are definitely family unity cases, right? Keeping families together. H, I, and K are about employment opportunities, right? The astrophysicist, the basketball player. Then we have L, right? Humanitarian based or personal safety, right? Keeping people like M, N, and O safe here in our country because they're seeking asylum. So I'm interested to see who you all prioritized. Our group was definitely looking at the younger people that might be, like DACA eligible, so C and D. We also, looked at N and O, and M, people who are, fear return to their home countries, and L and I. So is there any other group that wants to share kind of maybe who they might have struggled between? I know we really struggled between a couple.
Well, I have a question because I have three foreign-born children who are adopted and are U.S. citizens. And so in 1998, they changed the laws so that my last child who was adopted did not even have to become a naturalized citizen. The other first two had to become naturalized citizens, which was real easy because they were adopted. But so I don't understand why D is even on the list.
So this, let me pull up what D is again.
It's adopted teenage child of a U.S. citizen.
Right. So it could be the fact that it could be that they haven't petitioned for them yet.
Well, I mean, we didn't even petition for Jane. I mean, I could have gotten a passport to show she's a U.S. citizen, but she was a U.S. citizen just by the fact that we adopted her, and I put that on her birth certificate then when we adopted her. So.
Right. So it's purely hypothetical, and I think it just goes toward, without any laws and the power that your group had, would this be somebody that, regardless of any kind of policy or any kind of law in the books, somebody you would keep in the U.S. So
we put that person on our list, but we had a backup because we said, well, this person should already be a citizen. So it doesn't really count.
So we have 8, but we did, but we looked at, those that we felt were most vulnerable to, persecution if they did so. And then L, I think is the one that had the child that would be of needs. So we had L, M, N, O, and then we decided to keep the family A, B together. So.
Yep.
Hey, we were in the same ballpark. We had ABC and LMNO.
And we'd have C if we did, thinking D was or should already be a citizen. So.
I'll tell you that when I do this with my high schoolers, they want to keep the astrophysicist, they want to keep the basketball player, and this is where we get into really deep conversations about humanitarian relief and who are our priorities here in the United States. And a lot of my high schoolers, they really like the idea of the elite basketball player staying here in the US. So it makes for really great conversation with them about that. I also did this with some Edgewood students, and it was very split in terms of who they would accept. But you all seem to all be on the same page, or we all seem to be on pretty much the same page. There was just a couple that made it really, really hard. So thank you all for entertaining that exercise and doing the work and not just saying everybody is let in, even though I wish everybody could be let in. And, here's to expanding immigration policy and the possibility of all types of people being let into the United States so that we can become better for it, a better country for it.
Thank you, Aisa. I have one more favor to ask of you, Aisa. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, could you write 7 bullet points about what we could practically do? We could pray, do you have any current volunteer needs? I know it's a strange time. Are there letters we could write to congressmen about topics? So if you could give us a handful of practical, specific things that we could do, I will make sure that this group gets that list.
Definitely, for sure. I'll send you what I was thinking about talking about next, which is too late for. So I will send you that. Also, I'll send you bullet points in light of anything that changes as of this Friday, because there might be some more action items after what's announced by the Biden administration on Friday.
Thank you very much. I am pretty convinced that both Aisa and Jean-René have figured out how to do cloning, because I think there are 2 or 3 of each of them, because I can't figure out how any one person would do all of what they both do. So thank you both very much.
Can I make one announcement too?
Yes. Next week?
Next week. Oh, no, I was actually going to say, so Refuge is going to have another letter writing. Speaking of at least small things you can do, we're going to do another Letters to the Border over Zoom. We did this right at the very beginning of the pandemic, and it worked pretty well. So February 28th, and Rabbi Bonnie Margulis has agreed to come talk about what's happening with sanctuary and how that might change, as well as she'll probably give a bit of a summary of the talk the previous week that I think Aisa mentioned by Aaron Barbado, who's going to talk about what's happening under the Biden administration. So it's a great chance to get an idea of kind of where things stand and then write to people in detention. So we'll send more information about that.
Angie, if you would send those things to me, and Aisa, if you would include the webinar, the upcoming webinar, then I'll consolidate those all into one
Great.
email that I have a list of who all was here tonight, so I will send it to everybody who came. And next week we switch topics to environmental justice, and Nola Walker and Angie will be leading us in that conversation about how we engage that topic. So
mostly Nola. I think a little bit.
And this is an area where Nola has taught a course at Edgewood and has been really, this has been her thing lately. So.
Well, and can I just say quickly that there have been several articles this week because of the Biden administration effort at looking at everything through a racial justice and lens, equity. So read the newspapers, because they're all really on topic about what environmental justice might mean moving forward.
What a great community. Thank you all. Lord God, we thank you for this evening and your presence among us. Help us to be your people by your power and for your glory. Amen.
Thanks for watching, and we hope it was very meaningful. If you'd like to know more about what you learned here, don't hesitate to contact the church office at info@cpcmadison.org or visit our website at cpcmadison.org. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to this channel to make sure you don't miss out on what we have coming up. May the peace of Christ go with you always.